another day that you have made. Whatever comes, I won't complain. For all my hope is in your name, and now your joy, oh, is my praise. I give thanks for all you have done, and I will sing of your mercy and your love. Your love is failing, Lord, I am grateful. When I was down, you brought me out and set my feet on higher ground. So here I stand, you are my God. Your faithfulness is my solid rock. I give thanks for all you have done, and I will sing of your mercy and your love. Your love is unfailing, Lord, I am grateful. I give thanks for all you have done. Won't forget all the battles you have won. Your love is unfailing, Lord, I am grateful. And as we lift our hands, the heavens open, heavens open. So let our lives declare the love our God has spoken over us. And as we lift our hands, the heavens open, heavens open. So let our lives declare the love our God has spoken over us. I give thanks for all you have done, and I will sing of your mercy and your love. Your love is unfailing, Lord, I am grateful. I give thanks for all you have done, and won't forget all the battles you have won. Your love is unfailing, Lord, I am grateful. Lord, we are grateful for all you've done. Yes, Lord, we are grateful.
Hey everyone, Pastor Jake here. Just want to say hello. It's a sunny day here in spring, and so I'm just here again with another encouragement. You know, it's been funny. I've been seeing some more articles recently about how people who, you know, at the beginning of this crisis were hoarding unreal amounts of toilet paper and hand sanitizer and masks, like ridiculous amounts. And then now that things have, especially in the stores, things have sort of evened out, and we can see that, you know, there's enough supply for everything, and there's, you know, even though there are times of shortages, that we have everything we need. But the people that hoarded in the beginning, they're trying to return all of these items, and basically these stores are not accepting the return. They're saying, look, you were trying to hoard, we know what you were trying to do, get out of here. And so it's kind of this interesting reversal, and in a lot of ways these people are getting a little bit of maybe some interesting justice for trying to take too much stuff, you know. And it kind of makes me think about just what was going through their head when they thought about hoarding ridiculous amounts of stuff, what goes through our minds, because for a lot of us, when we first entered this crisis, a lot of us, our first thought was, how can we get everything we need? And I know none of you hoarded beyond what was necessary, because y'all are amazing, and so I know that was none of you that I'm referring to. But I know that it's just whenever we're faced in situations where we're afraid that there's not going to be enough, that there's not going to be enough of what we need, that when fear comes in, hoarding can be the mentality. And it's interesting because especially those first couple of weeks of quarantine, we saw all these interesting YouTube videos, viral videos and memes about people arguing in stores, people being rude, and just kind of these chaotic situations. And so we see what happens when fear takes over, right? We see what happens when our mindset is one of there's not enough, versus our mindset being I'm taken care of, I have everything I need, God is taking care of me. And so I'm really fascinated by this idea of mindset, because really what it comes down to is that our mindset is really, what are our thoughts? What are we allowing our thoughts to be? Because if our thoughts take hold, they become our words, right? And our words take hold and they become the things we do, our actions. And then our actions built up together over a long period of time, that becomes our reality, our life, right? And so what I find really interesting is that if our mindset is scarcity, if our mindset is there's not enough, then we're going to think that way, we're going to talk that way, we're going to act as if there's not enough, and ultimately our entire view of life is going to be that there's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's not enough resources, there's certainly not enough toilet paper, right? And on the flip side of that, if we think in terms of abundance, in terms of favor, in terms of the fact that we are taken care of, that we are seen, that we are held, that we are provided for, that God has blessed us with what we have, that God has brought us this far, God has blessed us in the past, and He will continue to bless me in the future. If we think about things in that way, our words reflect that, our actions reflect that, and that becomes, again, our reality, right? And so we see the importance of mindset. And it's interesting because, I see mindset come up so much in Jesus' teachings about how to think about the kingdom of God, how to think about God's love for us, right? And it's interesting because Jesus, He didn't only teach with His words, He didn't only teach in the context of actually delivering a teaching, but He used His miracles also not only as a way to display His power, but as a way to convey His heart for people. And so there's this story that we all know, and actually it's a story that shows up in all four Gospels. And I'm just going to read us today the version that shows up in Luke 9, but it's when Jesus feeds the 5,000. And so again, it's in all four Gospels, and what that kind of really tells me is that this is a really crucial story to really in all the facets that Jesus is being portrayed, that this story is really one that we want to take notice of, right? And it says in Luke 9, verse 12, late in the afternoon, the 12 disciples came to Him and said, send the crowds away to the nearby villages and farms, so they can find food and lodging for the night. There is nothing to eat here in this remote place. So Jesus had been teaching, He has His disciples, and He gathers a really large crowd, a crowd of 5,000 people that are there listening to Jesus teaching, that are a part of what He's doing. And the disciples come to Him, and they're kind of freaked out because they're like, how are we going to manage all this? We can't take care of these people. There's not enough resources. There's not enough food to take care of these people. These people are getting hangry. We need to send them away. Just as a side note, I actually only just recently understood and discovered what being hangry is. I grew up most of my life not realizing that becoming hangry was a thing. I felt it. I'm not saying I didn't actually experience being hangry, but no one ever gave me a term for it. So a couple years ago, I just started to realize, like, oh man, people are, they really think it's important that they get food in their system if they're starting to get a little grumpy. And I realized, like, my whole life I'd been grumpy, and I never realized that food was the answer. It's crazy. So certainly we see that when we are deprived of things we need, how all of a sudden our whole mindset shifts, right? That hanger, or in my case, I like to call it hangxiety, because rather than angry, I get really anxious and nervous. So my hangxiety, we see that when we don't get what we need, we get anxious or we get angry, right? And that translates to the fact that if we are afraid that we're going to continue not to get what we need, that not only are we hungry now, but if we're afraid that we're going to continue to be hungry, that there's not enough for us, then we'll continue to get more anxious and more angry, right? And it's interesting that we find the disciples thinking about this, that they're looking at this crowd of 5,000 people and they're saying, this situation's only going to get worse, and we don't have what they need. So they say, there's nothing to eat here. We need to send them away. And Jesus comes back with his one-liner. It's 3 words. This is how Jesus rolls. He's cool, and he just knows how to say exactly the right thing that people don't necessarily know what to do with at the moment, but it's the wisest thing. And he just says, you feed them. You feed them. And they're like, what? They say, we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Or are you expecting us to go out and buy enough food for this whole crowd? For there were about 5,000 people there. And Jesus replied, tell them to sit down in groups of 50 each. So the people all sat down. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven, and blessed that food. And then breaking the loaf into pieces, he kept giving the bread and fish to the disciples so they could distribute it to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted. And afterward, the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. There's a bunny. It's a bunny. And Easter was not too long ago, and there's a bunny right there. There's 2. It's a sign. No, anyway, Jesus provides. Jesus actually provides in abundance for this crowd. Not just enough, but more than enough. And what's interesting is the disciples came to him with a mindset of fear, a mindset that there's not enough, a mindset of scarcity. And Jesus responds and shows them that there is more than enough, that there has always been more than enough. Even when it's beyond the reality that they're looking at. They were looking at what seemed to be enough food for maybe one group of people at a dinner party, and Jesus translated that into feeding 5,000 people. And it's interesting because it just makes me think, are we like the disciples? When we face situations related to quarantine, when we first got into all this, and even now, do we approach it like the disciples, where we're full of questions, we're full of anxiety, we're full of wondering, where is this going to go? How are we going to do this? How are we going to fix this? And honestly, I can't even deal with it, right? Like they were saying. And Jesus first, he tells them, no, look, this is our responsibility, but don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. We have everything we need. And so again, I just ask you, what's your mindset? I know for me, it's often, there's not enough time. There's not enough time in the day, right? I don't have enough energy. Even if I had all the time in the world, I'd get sleepy, right? And certainly, there's not enough money, right? The situation we're in, the crisis we're in, it agitates all those feelings, right? But we're faced again with this idea of scarcity and this idea of abundance. And it's for us to choose, regardless of our circumstances, whether we're looking at 5 loaves of bread and 12 fish, or we've just fed 5,000 people with that. Again, it's our choice. It's our choice. Do we want to trust what Jesus is saying is the way of the kingdom, is the reality of heaven, or are we trusting our own math, our own logic, right? And it's interesting because we go, and I'm going to shift over, we go to Matthew 6:26, and it's a really amazing verse. And Jesus says, look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest, or store food in barns, for your heavenly Father feeds them. And aren't you far more valuable to him than they are? And again, I've always really connected with that verse. And what I love about it is when he's using the birds as an illustration, when we think about the birds are in full trust of nature, but really they're just in full trust of God because they live. They don't think and worry and plan ahead and have anxiety and make shopping lists, and they don't save this much money for emergencies and this much money for this and that, and they don't, I'm not saying these things are bad at all, but the birds live moment to moment. They don't, and like the verse says, they're not storing food away, they're not farming, they're not planning for the next year, they're just simply in the moment, and they are fed, right? They make it happen. They can live moment to moment, and they're not in control. They're just trusting that their next meal will be there. And it's interesting because it's so hard for us to think like this. It's really hard because I know a lot of you're great planners, and you have to be, running a family is a lot of work, and planning for a family is a lot of work. And so I am not at all saying that planning is a bad thing, but I think the illustration that we see here is that we plan, birds don't, and they are still more than taken care of. So for us who plan, we're also the ones that this verse says is especially valuable to God. I mean, we're created in his image. We, have this breath of life that God has given us as humans. And yes, we do have the ability to plan, but also we are so valuable to God. And so, it's an interesting thought to think, what would it be like if we just trusted, if we pulled back a little bit on planning? Because, for me, it makes me think, sometimes when we get too deep in planning, it's reflective of a mindset that isn't just trusting that there is always going to be enough, right? And so again, I can't stand here and look into each one, or sit here right now and look into each one of your situations and tell you it's all going to be okay, don't have to worry about anything, because I don't know, and I'm not presuming to know exactly what you're going through. What I am saying is that beyond your circumstances, beyond your financial situation, beyond, whatever's in your fridge, or, how much toilet paper is in backstock, beyond all that, there is a mentality, and that mentality is either one of trusting God, that God has abundance, God has everything we need, and if we trust that, then like the birds, we will be okay, because haven't you been taken care of thus far, right? There's a mentality of scarcity, that there's not enough, that I don't know what's going to happen in the future, and therefore I need to spend every minute until then worrying, planning, making sure it's all going to be okay. But in reality, how often have we seen that all that worrying and planning really didn't make much of a difference in the outcome anyway? The thing about fixing our mentality, working on our mentality, is that when we can move towards a place of trust, when we can move towards a place of abundance and a mindset of abundance, that we actually begin to feel a sense of peace, right? A sense of ease within us. And what's interesting is with, coronavirus and all this going around, it really made me think about the word disease. Is, if you break it down, it's dis-ease. It's the sense that not all is right, not all is at peace within your body. And in the same way, I find that scarcity, I find that anxiety, I find that fear, they're diseases, right? Because they put us in dis-ease. And I know that God's heart for us is to be at ease, right? Is to be at peace. And I genuinely believe that the more we can wrap our heads around the idea that Jesus shows us in his life, in the scriptures, an idea of abundance, the kingdom has more than enough for you. And we see in his words about the birds that he takes care of them, he's going to take care of you. And so in that, I think that in this time of great, as we've seen in our world, disease, right? Disease, dis-ease. We see a lot of stress, we see a lot of anxiety. But if we can move and shift our mindset to one of trust, surrender, that God is abundant, that the life He has for us is abundant, then I believe that we will see within ourselves a sense of ease, and that from the inside out we are actually beginning to heal. That's what I want for myself. That's my prayer and hope for y'all, and I just glad you tuned in today, and have a wonderful week.